Good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, HubSpot Nation. Welcome to a special episode of Let's Build. We're building buyer-aligned sales framework today with John and Mike. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Thanks, Chris.
Good to see you. Before we dive in, how about 30 seconds? We'll start with you, John. Why are you here, and why are you passionate about what we're about to talk about?
Sure. So I'm founder of CRM Assist. We're a HubSpot partner. And one thing that we do is a little bit different, Mike and I, is often when we go into a SMB, they need help on the soft side of sales, right? What should their sales process be? Maybe it's somebody running the sales organization that's not a professional salesperson. There might be an entrepreneur or an engineer or something. And so what we can do is come in and help them with what their sales process should be, how account planning should work, how their salespeople can be coached.
Yep. And I'm definitely passionate about sales. I've been a veteran of 6 startups, 2 went IPO, 4 successfully exited, as well as extended time at both Oracle and HP, where we were able to deliver double-digit growth in environments where the companies were not experiencing double-digit growth. So my biggest passion is helping salespeople become better at what they do and building businesses for success. And I love to do that and love to share what's worked.
Well, let's not wait any longer then, because I think a lot of people out there are trying to figure out what actually works right now in such an interesting moment, we'll say, as we've never had such an abundance of technology and tools, and now AI as a collaborator, researcher, like doing all the things for us.
Yep.
Yet we're being told that it's still word of mouth at all costs. It's still all about the human to human relationships. It's all about trust. How do you start to break through that noise, maybe look past the shiny objects, and especially when a company, let's take the situations where something has been working long enough for them to be successful, and now all of a sudden it's not.
Yeah, I think that's something that happens an awful lot these days. And it's funny, you mentioned technology, in your comment. And I would say that technology always does something for you and it always says something to you. And so understanding that equation really helps when you're trying to figure out how to optimize, operations. And one of the things I've always said about technology in particular is if it's applied correctly, it always increases productivity. But if it's applied incorrectly, it tends to have the opposite effect because it helps you do things inefficiently faster. And so what it typically comes down to is, are you automating the right processes? Do you understand, what has impact both positively and negatively? And then how do you apply the technology so that it works for you? And that's really what I've spent a lot of time doing. And one of the reasons that I connected with John was you can have the greatest process in the world, but if you can't automate it, no one's going to use it. And if they don't use it, it doesn't do you any good and you can't scale it. And so that's where CRM really plays a big role. HubSpot plays a big role. I love HubSpot, especially for early stage companies. And, when I think about sales and how much it's changed, digital has changed everything. I was having a conversation the other day. Somebody said technology is the sales, B2B sales, is the one discipline that technology has really had a tough impact on, because before it came along, prospects wanted to talk to salespeople. since it's come along, they get everything from the internet. They don't want to talk to salespeople. And so, what works best in starting a good sales cycle is a conversation. So the first hurdle is, how do we get to have people want to have conversations with us? And that gets involved in technology. But when I think about sales, I love B2B sales because it's the only business I can think of where as a salesperson, you get a franchise. It's called your territory. But instead of you paying them, they pay you to run it. And they give you all these resources for free. It's great if you know what to do with them. And so I tend to tell people, look, treat it like it is your franchise. It's your business. And the first thing you have to do is create a plan that's going to be effective and impactful. And when I look at the way salespeople and sales managers plan today, frankly, it's awful. They start with objectives and goals. And that's the worst place you could possibly start a plan. People say, well, what do you mean? Where should we start? Facts. Facts tend to work. And when I think about, well, why do we, why is that so important? It's so important because the first thing you need to figure out as a salesperson is where you should spend your time. And so you need to figure out, how do I do the research and how do I profile out my best opportunities? And so that's where you start. And that's also where the CRM plays a big role, because most of that data is in the CRM. And if it's not, and not all of it is, but that's okay, because that's how you use AI. That's how you use technology. Give me the data that I don't have, combine it with the data I do have, and start there. And so you then take the data you don't have, and you need to profile that in the data model. I love when you talk about data model, because the reality is people don't understand this. For an application to work well, for you to automate a process well, you have to have the right data model. I used to compete in the SAP market, and people will come in and say, hey, we're going to implement SAP. I go, you do realize it's not going to work like it did in the demo, right? They go, well, why not? I go, because you don't have your data modeled the way they do. Okay, so and the same thing holds true with CRM and sales. So the first thing I tell them is, look, pick 5 or 6 things that you believe are common to your best prospects, and get those accounts modeled out and say, look, here are my best opportunities. And then people say, okay, great. Then I build objectives, right? No. What do you mean no? When you have your best opportunities figured out, you build strategies to exploit those opportunities, right? And then you build plans and activities to execute those strategies. And when you then know what your best opportunities are, what strategies you can execute, you commit to the execution of those strategies because you have the time and the resources to do so. You can actually set realistic objectives for what you're going to do. And so that's where you start. And the CRM plays a big role, right? And then when you get that done, you're ready to start executing around the fundamentals of selling. Yeah. And that's where you have to understand what that is. And what it's not is basically what almost every B2B SaaS company implements today, and that is an activity-based sales cycle. They execute activity in the hopes that's going to have impact, but they have no way to measure that.
That's volume. It's a volume game, right, Mike?
So I'm not a genius, but I know that if you apply volume to anything where you can't measure impact, by definition, productivity has to go down and cost has to go up. It has to.
It's that simple, folks. Like,
you have to hire more people to do more things, and hope that, and so it's just awful.
So John, What kind of facts are we helping people find, or create visibility around these facts? So I like the way you put that, Mike. Like, because there's just a wealth of data. I mean, you've been in business for a while. You've been successful. In theory, you did some stuff on purpose to be successful. Do we see that in the CRM? How are you first assessing the CRM to see if it's even there in the first place? And what are the first go-tos as far as like what we need to see to even understand, have we been successful, and how did we get here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between data and information, right? So, I mean, these days it's really easy to use whatever AI tool you want to update all the information you need on a contact from LinkedIn, or, Zoom info data coming from, onto your account record in HubSpot. So it just, but what's important? I mean, that's what you really got to look. Otherwise, you're just going to bombard your salespeople with a bunch of useless information. So depending on what segment you're in, what you're selling, that's what we customize for each customer, right?
Vertical, size, revenue, growth. Are they in a competitive business? Are they highly regulated, right? These kinds of things tend to either push you toward a certain profile where, hey, this technology is really great if any one of these 5 things are happening, or 6 or 7 things are happening. And when you get 4 or 5 or 6 of those things, hey, there's an A client for me, right? But the other thing that's in the CRM that everybody misses is, okay, I have the accounts, right? Great. Who are the people? When I was at a big red tech company, I took over a region that had $5 million quotas, and they couldn't understand how they could possibly make their quotas. And I'm like, how could you possibly not make your quota? So they go, well, we're heavily penetrated. I go, you are? Yeah. They're great. What accounts? So they put up the accounts. I said, great. Tell me who the 5 key stakeholders are to sell the solutions. They named them. Okay. How many of them do you have the names of? How many of them do you have the titles of? How many of them have you ever spoken to? And how many of them do you have relationships with? Well, starting from that pyramid down, the number they had was under 60%. Like, okay, so you're not even marketing to 40% of the people, and we went on from there, and they're like, oh my God, yeah, right? But that data is in the CRM. And if it's not, what do you do on Zoom Info? You grab it and you put it into the CRM. These are basics that people just don't think about.
Why do you think, because that resonates a lot, obviously, why do you think, like, when we talk about the data that you should have, people immediately think of these data companies like ZoomInfo and this intent data and all this other stuff that's available outside without looking at like closed one like stuff first.
Right.
Well, how did we get there? Like, why is that such an overlooked thing?
I think it's because they think, and it's silly. They think, okay, so yeah, we sold that, right? But that one was different, or we did that one this way. They think it's them versus the account. And that comes from sales process. And we're going to talk about that. And then you say, what do you mean? Your sales process is a selling process. It's focused on you. The buyer is where the process should be focused. And when you think about the buyer, you realize that buyers go through very similar stages of buying, the way they just make a decision. And so when you get out of your own way in terms of, look, it's not about me, it's about them. And when you get out of your own, it's not about my process, it's about their process. You start to realize, wow, maybe I should look at some of the accounts that have actually bought from me, see what I've done that's worked, and try to do more of that. But they don't do that.
Yeah. And that's why I see like RevOps teams and like marketing ops, sales ops, whoever's enabling and managing CRM, they always wonder why, like it doesn't get more usage, and the data is in there, but people aren't grabbing it. And it came up last week, and like kind of an interesting take that I hadn't thought of it from that direction. But again, like it's easy to spot like veteran salespeople that have been super successful, never touched a tool in their life, right? They because they understand it's about the relationship. And when we talk about trying to uncover these facts and the data, it exists somewhere at the very least in the salesperson's head.
You're absolutely
right.
right.
And that's where they might be willing to share it, but when you don't ask for those five key stakeholders, like I'm sure those journeyman, salespeople, they've got the Rolodex in their head.
Sure.
Like
That's
they
right.
might not label them the same way. And this is where like starting to cross that bridge of common language and helping, to enable that data in the system so that it actually is actionable and usable. Because those are the most fun conversations, because you can get really quickly like, okay, this thing clearly worked 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
This thing did not work at all. Like, how do we start doing this 100 times?
That's exactly right. Because I mean,
Right.
I love to have this conversation. And one of the problems with CROs and RevOps is they don't think the CRO goes, I want my reports, I want my, my whatever, right? And RevOps has to give it to them. They don't realize how strategic RevOps could be if they just let them. And so one of the first things I say to a CRO is, so let me understand your activity-based sales process. Okay, great. It's a linear process, step by step, right? Yep. Okay. Tell me about the last 10 sales you closed. How many of them did you close that followed that exact process? None or one. Okay. Okay. Now let me ask you about your best reps. When you ask them about the CRM, what do they say? Oh, they say they don't like it, or, oh, God, I can never get them to update it. Yeah. Did you ever ask them why they don't use it? Because I have. You want to know what the number one answer is? What? I go, that's not the way I sell. That's the number one answer. So I say to the CRO, okay, if your prospects don't follow it and your salespeople don't use it, the best ones, then why is it your process? And they just look at you like, well, how else could we measure anything?
Oh, God.
What are you measuring?
Yes.
You're measuring activity without impact. The definition of non-productivity is activity without impact. Why are you measuring non-productivity? And so I say to them, look, if you let RevOps work with somebody like me and you guys, you'll get a tremendous boost in productivity. You say, well, why? You go, because what we've done is we map the activities in your sales process to the buyer's decisioning process. And when you do that, the seller has a group of activities they know to execute in that particular stage of the cycle. It might be the activity in your cycle, in your sales process. It might not be, but it's still an appropriate activity. You pay sales guys how much money? And you won't even let them decide which activity to execute when? Why?
That's why they don't use the CRM at that point.
That's
they're
right.
going to do it the way that they're going to do it, because they need to, win these deals, build these relationships.
That's exactly right. So I always say, look, think about it this way. You always call your enterprise sales leader a quarterback, right? Okay. Ever watch a football game? The guy's got a playbook on his arm and a little flip thing there, which tells him a number of options he has in a given situation. Why do you think your salesperson's any different? He's not. She's not. The other thing you need to do is then align the resources with those activities so that the salesperson understands, I should be executing one of these activities with this resource at this time. Now, If a salesperson is executing the next best activity with the right resource at the right time, what do you suppose would happen to cost of sale and productivity? It would have the inverse effect to what's going on today. And that's really what we've done, and what John has helped me with is bringing it to the CRM so that it becomes automated and people use it. And that's what we've done. So yeah, go ahead, John. Yeah,
so it's measurable, right? I mean,
it's measurable.
That's what you can't measure.
So what I've done, and you made a great point earlier, Chris, about vernacular, about common terms, so we know how to talk about things and what things mean. So I've looked at the stages of a sales cycle that are emotional. People make emotional decisions and then support them with logic. So the sales cycle you see on the top is actually from Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie taught this many years ago, and he's right. A person goes through very simple stages. They have to become aware of what you have, curious and interested in what you have. They have to have then a desire to solve the problem you solve with a product like yours. Then they have to have the desire to solve it with your product. Then they have to go through their risk assessment of, do I buy this or do nothing? And then you close them. Those are the stages you're bringing a prospect through. And then, we talk about pipeline. Like, okay, look, in the first stage, you're target. You're not in the pipeline. When you get to the second stage, okay, you're now a suspect, and then you're a prospect, then you're a qualified prospect, then you're a well-qualified prospect, then you're a customer, right? And in each of these stages, you have to think about two-way relationship. And this is what this does. Look, to them, you're an unknown, you're a vendor, you're one of a few, you're exclusive or dominant, and then you're a partner. Right? That's what happens. And then on the other side of the coin, look, you're a target, you're a target, you're a suspect, you're a prospect, you're a qualified prospect, you're a well-qualified prospect, and you're a customer. That's the two-way relationship. People don't make these connections. And without these connections, you are absolutely, destined to an activity-based sales cycle where you can't measure impact. And so when I look at sales processes, when I come into it, I look at their sales process and say, okay, each of the things in your sales process goes in one of these buckets underneath here. By the way, there's probably 5 to 10 other things that they could do in those stages that are not in your process that would move these prospects along. And then we align those resources to those activities. And then there you have what is called a sales cycle framework. It's not a sales process the way that companies run them today. It's a framework inside of which the process is contained. And that's a big, big, big difference from what is in the marketplace today. And that's the essence of success. And I say this, there's a big push on today around coaching and training. I'm like, guys, how do you know what to coach them? You don't. You want to know something? When I use this, I measure one simple thing. I measure days in stage and conversions. And they say, why do you do that? I go, simple. Each of these stages has a skill that's attached to it, whether that's questioning for discovery and need qualification, whether that's presentation skills, negotiating skills, closing skills. You know what? When something's in a stage for longer than average, chances are really good that rep has a problem with that skill. When something's in that stage very much shorter than average, that rep's probably pretty good at that. So if I'm a manager, what am I doing? I'm getting these guys and gals to talk to each other so they learn from each other, because it's much easier for them to learn from each other than it is for them to learn from me. I'll give them the coaching if they need it, but I'd rather have them get it from their peers. And then if I have a problem where it's long for everyone, now I know my problem's systemic. I have a problem with the enablement. I have a problem with something that doesn't have something to do with the rep. There isn't a CRO on the planet today that can tell you that, because they don't have this type of a framework. Then I tell them, you're coaching people, right? Yeah, okay. How do you expect that coaching and training to stick? It's not going to stick if they don't have a framework. And they say, well, what do you mean? I go, all right, let's use a sports analogy. When you're playing baseball and you're teaching a guy to field ground balls because he plays third base, yeah. When he gets a ground ball, he needs to know how to react, right? It's muscle memory. But if he doesn't know it's a ground ball, he doesn't know what to do. The framework gives you that, so that coaching and training, the rep thinks, oh, I got to do this now. I'm going to execute this step. I need this skill, right?
Yeah.
So they then make the connection and the training sticks. So but this is why you got to put it in HubSpot. You got to put it in the CRM, because if you don't, it's not used. You don't get any of this value out, right? When I talk about generating attention, I go, okay, guys, you're using outreach? Yeah, okay, that's technology. It's probably killing you. And they go, well, what do you mean it's killing me? I go, you're trying to you're hiring all these SDRs to go out and do what? Oh, generate pipeline. No, you're not. What do you mean I'm not? They're calling to look for interest, because what you're trying to get them to do is what? Have the prospect see a demo. Prospects don't want to see demos if they're not interested in anything, right? So then the real reason marketing is hiring SDRs is what? It's because of what digital's done. They put their message on the website, but unless the prospect interacts, they don't know if they've gotten the message. So they hire a bunch of SDRs to make sure they get the message with emails, phone calls, spam. The objective should not be that. The objective should be a conversation. And so what do you do if you really want to generate pipeline? You blog. You get on LinkedIn. You become a part of the ecosystem that prospect lives in. You get them thinking about you in terms of problem solution, not product. That's how you get conversations going. And so when you campaign, you want those campaigns tracked in the CRM, especially since you have AI. Because now I can point AI and say, okay, what worked? What didn't work? You know, who did I get responses from? I mean, if you have the right data in the CRM, you literally could say, okay, these campaigns generate these type of responses at this rate from these stakeholders and ICPs. Who has that report today? No one. But if you model the CRM right, you could have that report, right?
Yeah. They all ask for that report.
Yeah, they can't have it because they have no way to measure impact, right?
Yeah. Why do you think it's so challenging? Because as you describe it, like this conversation, like moving for this conversation, it's like business development, you know, in the original sense of the word, in my opinion. And it's almost like when you're having a conversation with these leaders, when you take digital out,
Yeah,
like, you know, it's like a trade show.
Yep.
It's like, oh, of course, like this is how we would operate. And then we add this in, and all of a sudden, like what is happening there? And an example of where it's kind of like a vicious cycle, to where you have RevOps trying to serve the measurement, you know, requests of the leaders, which aren't aligned with creating a framework. And yesterday I was working with somebody and we were doing a workflow. They were telling me about a workflow, and it was one of those workflows where it's like, we've got to force the contact through the stages just so we can measure when they skip stages.
Yep.
And it's like, what? Like,
Right.
what are we doing here? Like, instead of enabling and like driving everything towards, I want them skipping all the damn stages, like and getting right to close one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what kind of energy, like, I think that's where we underestimate when we ask for these activities
Right.
that are just supposed to be low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And everybody else is doing it. They've always done it. Let's just set up the campaign. No problem. Let's just get some intent data. It's just some emails going on in the back. That stuff has way more impact on the effort and mental load of the team and the customer at some point, that it's very hard for somebody to convince me at this point that there is still value, right, in doing that, unless it's your subject matter experts themselves, and they can, when they make contact, it's an instantly valuable conversation.
Absolutely right, because you actually said the magic words right in the beginning of those comments when you said, before we introduced, before digital, yeah, it worked, and this is obvious, right? The technology messed you up really bad in many respects, is what I like to say. I say, because look, when you didn't have digital, customers wanted to talk to salespeople, and you started conversations. Digital took it away. Digital basically said, well, I don't need to talk to a salesperson anymore because I get everything I want on the internet. Okay, but that doesn't change the fact that as a salesperson, you have to have a conversation, because when I'm engaging a prospect who's already interested in the technology, he's already shaped his opinions of the problem, of the solution, what's best. And oh, by the way, that's only 4% of the market. Where you claim to be developing pipeline, you're not. You're looking for interest. You're not doing anything in the 96% of the market, which is 25 times bigger than the interested part of the market, to generate pipeline. So I say to them, look, this is a good example of technology automating the wrong processes. When you get someone's attention, you want to get their attention around a problem that they are motivated to have a conversation with you about. To get them curious and interested, you have to help them understand the value and benefit of solving the problem. Forget about the product. They know, they don't talk about the product. Talk about the benefits to them and their organization about solving the problem. When they become curious and interested about your solution, that's absolutely when you bring in someone who understands the problem and the solution more technically, a product manager, a technical resource, because now you want to have credibility and you want to build trust with the customer. And guess what? The customer may love you. He may think you're a great salesperson. He may be appreciative of how you've helped him understand the problem, but he's not going to believe you're the resource that can deliver the value. And so you've got to bring that person in. And then you have to convince them to buy it and through some type of proof, ROI, business case, whatever it happens to be. But at the end of the day, aligning those stages with those resources is critical, because that's the way the buyer is making the decision. And so if RevOps is allowed to model the data the right way in the CRM and is allowed to explain the value of what the application, when tailored the right way, can deliver, the CROs will start to abandon what they have exclusively, meaning they're still going to want to see activity. But if I say to a CRO, would you just like to see plain activity, or would you like to see activity that's having impact? We know what the answer is going to be. Would you continue to like to get 30, 40, 50% accuracy in your forecast, or 90% accuracy in your forecasts, right? These are things that just, yeah. So you have to let the marriage happen between RevOps and the CRO. The CRO has to look at RevOps as a strategic, resource in their company.
So I do a B2B manufacturing, and common practice is sending out samples of some sort, free samples. And so I'll ask them, I say, do you track that? And they said, well, yeah, we have a record of it somewhere. Nobody really looks at it. I go, all right, who sends out the most samples? Your best salesman or your worst? They usually say, well, it's not the best one. Why is that? Because they're sending out the samples like, the first time they talk to somebody and they're not qualified at all because they're still in the attention or the interest stage, right? The better salespeople are waiting until they get to the desired stage, right? And it's a very important thing to track because one, it costs money, right? And it's just you got to get the salespeople doing the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. And when they're sending out those samples, whenever it is in the process, they're getting verbal commitments, and that's the worst thing to see. And again, that's why I'm so interested in the data model. It's not hard now in HubSpot. I refer to this kind of object as a deliverable. Like in a deliverable agreed to with a customer or a prospect, it doesn't matter when it happens. It doesn't matter when, like if money's involved or not. But if I say I'm going to send you something, especially physical product, and there's likely an expectation that you're going to test it, you're going to try it out. Like, how are we not tracking that stuff anywhere? And that's where we get bogged down in the measurement of like inventory management and booked revenue and realized and all this stuff. But when we take a step back and understand how the great sales guys do this, like if we don't create those commitments in that structure in the CRM, it's very hard for a new person or, the average salesperson to understand exactly why it's got to follow the process and start to connect it to, the successful sales team. Cause that's often like, and that's where it's so easy to suggest that the verticals, especially SaaS and manufacturing, almost always 1-2 in any conversation I'm around, to think that they're just drastically different. And in cases like this, they're not. Like if our process and we're building relationship and we can get the demo unit, the sample, whatever we want to call it, we get it in their hands, try before you buy. In the midst of this conversation, it's just like a freemium SaaS model, right? The difference is digitally, even though companies still find a way to not be great at this part, it can be a lot easier to say, okay, now it's in your hand. I just click a button and now you're a subscriber. And now you're paying us money versus, okay, we've got it installed maybe, but now all this other manufacturing event has to happen. But that's often a first place I look for from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, from a service perspective. Like there's activity like that out in the field that we put an immense amount of resources behind to be able to do. This is where marketing gets frustrated, by the way, that sales can just spin up like a $50,000 piece of equipment to send to some customer for free, while we're over here scratching and clawing for budget for content. But kind of to that point, the siloization of this, because of all the metrics, are we going to get to a point soon where when we come back to the word of mouth, the relationship building, the constant business development, like basically whenever you're interacting with a human being, where we can get to that full funnel or full life cycle management and be okay with like less scalability, just because it's different from what we're used to.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, it can create more scalability, especially if you have the same person interacting with the system, interacting with the human, and now AI is helping. Like, how do we get to that and have like kind of customer teams where we don't need to mix and match all these different roles if everybody's pointing towards like building relationships, building conversations, and
spot on, man. Boy, is that right. You're so right, Chris. And I talk about this all the time. is that, look, if you don't understand that the process and the data model have to match, you've completely missed it. Now, the second part of that is, if you don't understand that you have to have the right process, you're going to build the wrong data model. And in the world right now, how do you, and you crushed it with what you said, how do you get back to those kinds of relationships if your sales cycle does not include the customer? If you're not including the prospect in the entire, process you're building around the activities you're executing, how on earth are you going to get back to that? You're not. And so what you said about less being more, right? That's another way to say, look, if you optimize things, you don't need as much stuff to create growth and productivity. But when you're in this, let's keep doing activity, and even though we don't know how much of it works, we know some of it does, so let's do more of it, you're not going to get there. And that's really the toughest part of it. I mean, when I use the CRM, oh my God, it's so, because one of the first things I tell executives all the time is, look, one of the problems you have with the CRM is the sales opportunity part of the CRM. You know why you have that problem? They go, why? I go, think about your enterprise applications, whether it's your manufacturing SAP system, it's your financials, your HR system, and your CRM system outside of the sales part. What do they all have in common? Everything in them is factual. In the CRM sales opportunity, it's opinion, guesses, hypotheses. Okay, what are you going to do? You can't build a predictable model around that. So the first thing you have to do is build a data model and process that vets facts. So you either identify something as a fact, or you identify it as a not fact, but your goal there is to then figure out the fact, whether your hypothesis or your opinion is true, right? Nobody does that. So now what's happened? Oh, this is the guy who's going to buy. How do you know? Oh, because that's the person who always buys. Okay. This is the influencer. How do you know? Well, he reports. Well, how do you know that the executives listen to that person? Well, they don't. So what I do is I say, look, okay, we've got them interested. Great. We have the data from the campaigns and the CRM. We have all the, the planning stuff done. Great. Now we get to that interest phase where we want to get the stakeholders to buy in. Terrific. Are the stakeholders in the room? Are they involved? By the way, if you're doing it to a group of people who are going to so that they can get those people there, okay. But you got to have them, right? All right. If you have them and they've agreed to a next action, they're a prospect. Now, okay, they've said they want to solve the problem. Great. Is it funded? The answer to that is either yes or no, or I don't know. Now, what sales managers do? Well, you better know that. I don't know it. Okay. Should I stop? No, you should go find out. But the sales manager penalizes the rep because they don't know. So what is the rep going to do? They make it up.
Yes.
And you're like, what? So I can't tell you the number of reps I've had untrained. I would say to them, look, yes or no is a valid answer if it's true. I don't know is also a valid answer. You will not be penalized for that. But if you make it up, I'm really not going to be happy. And by the way, an assumption is also making it up. We need to have the facts, right? And then what I do when we sit down and we do a deal review where they're going to say, okay, now we're going to prove. Okay, when you get to the proof step, you're going to invest a lot of resources, and so is the prospect. Okay, if we're going to prove, we're going to have two things. What? We're going to have a funding source who's committed, who said, if you prove it, I'll buy it. And we're going to have a somebody who's going to influence that source, right? Who's going to build the business cases with you and so on and so forth, right? If I don't have that, I don't move forward. And so how do you know they have it? I sit down with the rep, and John has automated all of this in the templates for CRM. Here are the 12 things that matter in Medic. And here's an org chart. And now we're going to take that org chart and those questions, and we're going to find out if we know the answer. And if we don't, we're going to go find out the answer. And so now what am I doing? I'm spending my time on productive things, right? And so having that in the CRM where a manager can sit down with a rep and say, okay, we're going to review ABC account. Great. Here's the org chart. Here's what you say you know about the company and the deal. Let's go through it. And then let's build the one thing I don't see anybody ever do, a strategy to win.
A sales strategy.
Sales, like, let's build a sales strategy. Well, how can you build a sales strategy if you don't have any facts?
Oh, man.
Right? So that's why it's built out the way it is, so that we can get back to exactly what you said, which is the human relationship, the selling, right? Let's get the technology out of the way. And what I mean by that is don't stop using it. Use it correctly to automate a process that is productive. And to do that, you got to build a data model that automates that process, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm providing and John is providing is the process and the automation. And that's pretty much it.
And Chris, you asked about what facts. I mean, look at our business, right? When somebody needs help with their CRM, it's because something's changing, right? Revenue's going up, revenue's going down. They have a new distribution channel. They have a new, product line. But most of the time, it's because sales leadership changed.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost every single deal that we do is because the leadership changed. So that is the most important fact.
Yep.
If you're calling somebody where the CRO's been there for 5 years, he doesn't care.
No.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think that's, what we're getting at is defining this stuff so we can actually build technology underneath us that we can stand on, and we know it's always going to be there. And we're not going to trip and fall and fall into the chasm because it looked like it was right there, and then the buyer, disappeared because we're not tracking the fact that some other job change happened, or we don't understand the full org chart. Right. That's where so much of this data, even the third-party data, like the investments you're already making, just get way more valuable once you start defining some of this stuff. Because a lot of that job change stuff is staring you right in the face. Like you just have never tried to connect the dots on these closed won debriefs, on closed lost debriefs. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the beginning of a wonderful journey that we're going to take people on. It's hard to overcome the feelings like, how are we 25 years into CRM and we're still having to, have this conversation? But clearly, we still need to do it because there's teams looking for this kind of help, and especially in HubSpot land, as the data model does become more robust. And we move over into revenue, we've got to get into we've got to learn how to have these factual conversations to have the seat at the table. Otherwise, it's like, okay, cool. You can do whatever data model you want over there, but our ERP, our accounting system's over here, and that's where all the real, information is. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes having to use those systems, but they know it's real, and they know what they have to do to get to the real data. And luckily for us, HubSpot has built a great platform that can help, get those teams a lot clarity much quicker than ever before. And I always say, like, the accounting teams themselves, the finance teams, they're some of the quickest to get on board. Mm-hmm. Once they realize, like, oh, we can manage our communications better so people will pay us faster. Yep. Okay, I'm on board with that. So I think yeah, it's great for you guys to happy you could spend time today starting to shed some light on this in a right. It's not complex. It's not like the behavior that is happening all around us is the complex part. If we like build that in a complicated way and make our tools complex unnecessarily as well, now we've got no shot, and that's where salespeople opt out because they know I just need to have conversations. Like, and if you can't let me do that, I'm not going to use the system, right? Because I'm
Absolutely.
not closing deals if I'm not having conversations.
I think you're at a very critical stage in your last webinar that I watched. Hit on this a lot. AI. So if you don't fix this now, AI is going to make a big mess because it's not dealing with facts, right? But if you do fix it, you're only at the beginning of what AI could do. Like if I was a product manager at HubSpot, I'd put in the data model like this, and then I'd do the things they're doing. But then I'd say, guess what I can do? I can now write a Python AI model that's going to start to predict what's going to work with a specific kind of prospect. I can predict what the next best action would be in a deal. I can predict how people are going to react to certain kinds of campaigns because I have a solid process with a solid set of facts. And this is really what the hope for AI is. When you don't have that, the best AI in the world isn't going to help you because it's not dealing with reality.
Yes, it's garbage in, garbage out at a scale that we have never seen before.
That's exactly right.
So
Yeah.
let's avoid that whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's where AI will even help you figure out like if it's garbage or not.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part. But we'll continue this conversation because I expect the next 3 to 6 months to see some very transformational things. And we always talked about digital transformation wise, like getting left behind if you don't move. That turned out to be true in some spaces, but not always. There's lots of variables behind that, but now it's real. I think we're not going to see a bridge built over the gap. We're going to see a jump. And all of a sudden, you will not be allowed to do the things that you've always done before because you won't be able to make contact. The AI agents that are buying on the other side won't see you because they're not answering the phone. And so we're going to be here continuing this conversation, helping you, leverage, get those facts straight, build that foundation so that we really can finally solve for the number that is our salespeople are only spending 30% of their time selling.
Yeah.
Like imagine a world where we're about to get to 100%. Like by the end of the year, when we have voice activated interfaces for everything, it will literally be close to 100%. We could get a human being to where most of their time is spent strategizing, like the sales strategy that we talked about, or having the conversations and building the relationships.
Absolutely. I can put an avatar on the front end of a voice and you know what? That's me or you, or, we certainly can get there. And, but having the right data and the right process is critical to making that really work.
So again, I thank you guys so much.
Pleasure.
I think this was a great first pass. And until next time, we hope everybody enjoyed watching or listening. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, folks.
Right. Thanks, Chris.
You bet.